Do you think that esports is eventually going to get to a point where it is mostly data driven? Because a lot of times, I know for Overwatch, a lot of people complain about the data and like being able to apply the data is not really there. Like there's so much, like reading the data is so hard. And I've heard the same thing with League of Legends, though it sounds like League of Legends is getting better as kind of time goes on. Do you think that it's eventually going to get to a point where it is actually data driven? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Minds of Media. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and I am so excited to have this next guest on my show. She is a longtime figure in the League of Legends scene, having been a journalist, writing and doing video content for organizations such as The Score, Yahoo, ESPN, as well as being an analyst for H2 Gaming, and now Academy Director and Head Coach for 100 Thieves. Please let me introduce Kelsey Moser. Welcome to the show.
Hello, happy to be here. Sounds like it's going to be an interesting one, so let's get it started.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So I like to start off the show fairly simple, with a fairly easy question to kind of get us rolling. So you're from Georgia originally. I think you are. If you're not, then that's awkward.
I'm from Colorado.
Oh, Colorado?
I've actually never been to Georgia. But
really?
that's okay.
That's awkward,
I have an
isn't
interesting...
it? Yeah.
I'm curious, where did you get that I'm from Georgia, actually? Just straight off the bat.
Okay, so I did an extensive list of research on you, and so it was most likely in one of the articles that I've read, which is very interesting now, and I'm very sad for whoever wrote that article because they just made my life very, very hard. So, you're from Colorado. Where are you from in Colorado?
I'm from, like, around Littleton area, so between Lakewood and Littleton originally, and then I spent a lot of time in Littleton.
So Colorado is very interesting because, I mean, I would say that probably now it's most known for marijuana growing in like the last 5 years. Clearly back then it wasn't. What was Colorado kind of known for when you were growing up?
I would say usually when I told people I was from Colorado, I would get the questions, do you ski? Do you rock climb? That was usually it. And then the marijuana question came later, right? Now I get the marijuana question on top. So it's like, if I don't give an answer yes to either of those three, then immediately there's no more conversation. Just, all right, well, I got nothing. Let's move on to the next topic. So,
I think that's fair. What is it, your area that you grew up in, was it a very big area?
Not particularly. I think so. I would say that my city was Littleton, but we grew up kind of in an area that was sort of unclaimed. There were a lot of horses. So my mother's side of the family is a really big horse family. So there are a lot of horses around, and this is basically what it is: cows, horses, like very kind of rural area. So then that's sort of where I grew up. For the most part, after I turned like 9-ish, so yeah.
Interesting. So you grew up in this. Did you live on like a horse farm? Like, did you guys have like a horse ranch or?
We had a horse because my mother was like super into them, and then a lot of dogs and things like this. So that was most of it. I wouldn't say we lived on like a farm or a horse ranch, but this is what we had, and we lived around a lot of people who were farmers, right? That kind of situation.
Do you love riding horses? Because I'm terrified of them. I fell off one when I was a kid, and I'm like absolutely terrified of horses.
I don't love it in the sense that it's something I would always be like super attached to doing, but it's something I did a lot as a kid. So obviously it's like got sort of comforts to it. I think growing up learning how to kind of take care of animals is helpful. For a lot of children, to teach them responsibility, stuff like that. So getting up at 6 a.m. every day, go down to the stall, get the shit out of the stall, give the hay, give the grain, like refill the water. If it's freezing cold, too bad. Break through the ice, replace the water, get it done with. Like that kind of stuff, I think ends up teaching kids a lot of discipline. So.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned discipline and responsibility because in esports itself, it's almost like this weird dichotomy of we want to provide everything for a lot of players so that way there's a lot less stress. But in so doing that, you actually lose out on all these different opportunities where you can teach different responsibility. What do you think about that?
What do you mean lose out on opportunities?
So let's say that like renting, right, is a good example. Like learning how to pay
Oh yeah,
bills
yeah,
and
sure,
do
sure.
renting. Because all of this stuff is taken care of. A lot of times cooks are provided. A lot of times people don't even have to cook, which is a very basic thing you kind of learn growing up too. Like all of these different responsibilities tend to be provided for by a team.
Yep. So I've had a few conversations about this where I totally understand the angle that a lot of people take,
Mhm.
in which if we take care of everything else, then players 100% are focused on the game and doing this. But I really do believe that in order to actually really be focused, you have to have a sense of discipline coming from somewhere, like a
Yeah.
sense of self responsibility. So since I've, especially recently, I've worked with like a lot of younger kids who,
Mhm.
like, this is their, a couple of younger kids at the very least, who this is like their first time away from home. You know, this is the first time out of high school where they're basically living more or less on their own, like with a bunch of other guys, right?
Yeah.
And they have to figure out stuff like, how do I make doctor's appointments? How do I make dentist appointments? And then like the immediate first person they go to is either me or the manager, right? So those are the sorts of things where it's like, okay, you can't completely ease them into it because they have honestly more daily responsibilities than most people going off to college.
Yeah.
They have like a more packed schedule, a more inflexible schedule. So they basically get like one day to handle all this stuff, like appointments, laundry, and all this stuff. So they have to kind of learn how to take care of that or either live in a sty. And some of them prefer to just live in a sty. But you know what? What can you do about that? It's like it has to be a learning process. But I do think that there is a lot of maybe unexplored value to incorporating more of these like aspects of self responsibility. I don't want to do too much because, like I said,
Yeah.
a lot of these kids' lifestyles are very packed. And I think immediately the thought process is that we want to model the sports system. And a lot of sports professionals, they have like all of these things like meals and stuff and catering taken care of when they're at training. But at the same time, a lot of them own their own houses, like have to
Yeah.
pay their own bills, like have this sort of thing in place. And so you have to find something that's more appropriate for like 17-year-olds
Yeah.
while also being, I guess you should, while also being something that teaches self responsibility and stuff like that. And I think a lot of it is budget consideration too, right?
Yeah.
So like it's cheaper for an organization to have a gaming house.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I like that you kind of bring up the sports, and maybe we shouldn't compare it to sports all the time, because I've actually said this a lot, that the cultural, like the growing up culture of sports is just so different from esports, and where we're at, that maybe in 10 years from now, it'll get to that point. But as of right now, we at least don't have the cultural growth that sports has had, where you start at the age of like 6 and you build up into a system, whereas esports is more so at the age of like, I mean, it's getting better now, but like the age of 17, you kind of get plucked and thrown into a system, which is just an interesting dichotomy that doesn't happen in sports, because they have all this time to grow up. So it's an interesting quandary. So kind of looking back, are you still there? I want to make sure.
I may have
Okay.
what you said because of the internet. One second.
Yeah. Technical difficulties. Oh, there. Maybe we're back.
Right.
Okay. I think unlucky West Coast internet.
Okay, I think we're better now.
Okay.
Hopefully that's a blip and we'll be able to fix it.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, I find it interesting that that dichotomy is kind of there, and like in esports, you're basically balancing putting too much stress while also teaching responsibility, whereas in sports, it's not really like that. And it's a very interesting dichotomy that it sounds like you're at least somewhat focused on, kind of working on this problem of still teaching responsibility while managing stress.
Okay.
Test 1 2 3. Unlucky. It might also be my internet. I wonder if it's mine.
I like
Uh, I hear it thundering outside. If it's mine, I'm so sorry.
This is like, what do you think?
Oh, so sad.
Okay. My bad.
I don't know if it's you or if it's me. I'm in Florida, and there might be a thunderstorm rolling around. Which, if there is, I'm just gonna cry inside.
Okay. Are we back again?
I think so.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, like Airbnb life, where everyone is using the internet at different and varying times.
Yeah.
So
It
we'll
could
see.
also. I heard thunder, and I'm in Florida, so there's a small chance it might be me.
Okay. There's a small chance it's you.
Yeah, so I can take the responsibility on this one if it is. So
Alright. Well,
okay, I think we're good. I think we're good.
yeah, we can try a little bit more. Hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I would hope not, because I'm enjoying my conversation. So, kind of getting back here, looking at you growing up in this small area. Was it a small area where you literally knew everyone?
I think partly because so we were kind of close to a suburb, also, which is where I went to school. So I didn't know everyone in there. I think within our kind of corner of neighbors, everyone kind of knew each other. Like we would check in on each other. There was a situation recently where my mother, who's kind of living alone in her house now, caught on fire. So like everyone was able to help her out in the community, like check in on her, that kind of situation. So it is like fairly close, but it's not like everyone is having dinner at each other's houses every Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay, so what did your parents do growing up?
They worked a lot. So a lot of working involved. My dad was in geophysics.
Ooh.
My mother was in retirement planning. But yeah, my dad did geophysical engineering, so there you go. That's an interesting one.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
What was that like growing up with did you pick up a lot of math and science because of that?
Kind of. I was mostly a loner because I was an only child, so I did most of my studying on my own. My parents got home like pretty late at night. Generally was the situation. My dad used to help me with math sometimes, but we would argue a lot. I think he would get kind of mad and frustrated. A combination of reasons, obviously, but I think I would say it wasn't that I picked up a lot of math. Like sometimes I would go to work with him just because childcare sucks.
Yeah.
It's difficult. So yeah, then I would pretend to do his job, and he would pretend to say that I was doing his job, and like that kind of whole every situation, right?
Interesting. So what did you and your family like to do growing up? What were the fun things that you guys would do together?
Let's see. Fun things. Like I played a lot of video games. Sometimes my dad would play video games with me. My mother was like super into the horse thing, so sometimes we did that. I would say there was not like a lot of three of us together bonding activities. It was usually like I did something that my dad liked to do with my dad, or I did something that my mom liked to do with my mom.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. So growing up, you mentioned that you were kind of a loner. What does that mean when you say you were kind of a loner? That you didn't really like hanging out with other people, that you didn't get along with other people? What does that kind of look like?
I think it's weird because I think as a child I didn't really understand the importance of social interaction. Like a really dumb thing to say, right? But it's just it's not even that. I feel like I was particularly picked on or bullied more than other kids, which obviously everyone has that to an extent, but it was never that. It was just like I kind of avoided stuff. I was more interested in books or writing or math or any video games or whatever else, and I was just more interested in that than I was in other people. And it wasn't until like later on in my life when I realized that most of being an adult is interacting with other people, and so I came in at an inherent disadvantage, having not really practiced that particular social skills or that particular skill in general. So yeah.
That's really interesting that you say that you didn't really interact with people, because now this might be wrong too, but growing up, were you big into debate club and like philosophy club?
I was in like speech and debate and philosophy. Yeah. So I was in that, but that was like kind of that was just a very nerd thing to do. Right?
Yeah.
It was I really liked reading about philosophy, so I'm going to do this. I did extemporaneous speaking, which is like a competition where you have to put together a bunch of news sources and everything else, and then you spend most of your time like preparing for the competition doing that.
Yeah.
Putting magazines together, magazine clippings together, news articles together into a box and like arranging it by subject matter or whatever. And then you're given a random topic. They draw it for you, and then you have 7 minutes to prepare a speech with only using the information in your box, right? You have to
Wow.
use those as sources, so you have to prepare a speech to that extent. So that was mostly the competition that I did. So it was much more like kind of a loner competition. Obviously, we had like the extended team, which it wasn't the most popular subject in speech and debate. So there were a few of us that maintained the box together and then gave each other notes on like practice speeches and stuff like this. But it was kind of like that. So that was also most of the people that I interacted with in high school or in that group. That was kind of my main entertainment and focus there. And I was in the philosophy club as well. Yes, it's an interesting that you found that one.
Normally, I'm pretty good with my research, to be honest. Like normally, and I'm like super disappointed
just
in
not
myself.
in Georgia,
Yeah,
apparently. So.
yeah. I mean, I'm super disappointed with myself, but that's okay. It's interesting you mentioned being a loner, and when people think of like debate club, they think of the idea of conversing or philosophy too. Like a huge part of philosophy is like conversing and kind of challenging, and it's very interesting that you didn't really realize that this is so important until later on in your life.
Well, it's like a slight exaggeration, obviously, but I think it was just that I wouldn't say that movies or like normal accounts of high school are consistent with mine, where it's like I never felt this weird compulsion to fit in, right? I just kind of did the stuff that I thought was interesting to me, which was mostly like really snobby stuff, so no one really wanted to hang out with me either. So unless they were also into that snobby stuff, and obviously the image of the Russian novel where people who think too much of themselves are like sitting in a corner and discussing like theoretical or philosophical topics. Like that's kind of like how I imagined myself, which is really, really embarrassing to talk about, but it's like I did this and then I did a lot of cooking, especially when I was like left at home in summer by myself. Like I did a lot of like cooking and stuff like that. So yeah, I just was. Everyone who is an only child kind of develops a certain level of self sufficiency.
Yeah. I'm the oldest. My brother's 4 years younger than me, so I think I got more of the self sufficiency because I had to take care of him. But I definitely understand that. What is one of your favorite things to cook? Like, do you have a favorite meal that you like to like make?
I actually really like to make gnocchi. I think it's not expensive.
The pasta gnocchi.
It's just like it's just like really relaxing to make. You basically make mashed potatoes almost like you just boil the potatoes, put them through a ricer, mix it with flour, and then you don't have to actually own a pasta maker to make gnocchi. So that's part of the appeal, right? It's because I travel so much. It's just like I have potato and flours. Potato and flour, I can just like whip it out and have it boil when I'm at an Airbnb or whatever, and it's just something that's relaxing and easy to make.
Oh, my love for you has now grown exponentially because gnocchi is by far my favorite pasta out of all of the pastas, even though it's a weird pasta. So that is kind of on point. So you mentioned being kind of a loner out there. Did you ever feel like a reject, or were you just okay with this sense of I'm not involved with the group?
Yeah, I think I was just I didn't really have a huge opinion on it. Like I didn't really obsess over what all the other kids my age were doing, and I didn't really necessarily think that I was above them. I just kind of it's like this is what I'm focused on. This is what I want to do. You guys do your thing. We're just gonna pretend we don't exist. Like have our own little isolated. Obviously, there's always the encounter where it's like, all right, this asshole wants to go out of his way to make someone feel bad, and then there's like a bunch of other shit that goes with it that don't need to get into. But I think in general it was like pretty much mutually agreed upon as nation state separation, whatever.
Is that something that you've kind of always taken with you through like esports? Because I can't remember a huge time throughout like your esports career where you were someone who was okay, like not okay with being like part of a group. You seem to be always someone who always focuses on like you and what you can be doing better. Like that's almost like what I've always seen from the outside is like a very positive trait, almost that it's only about like the work that you do.
I think that's fair. I think for me, part of the appeal of coaching over content is that I did feel like what I was doing had more of a direct effect on the people around me. So that in that sense, I wanted to be kind of more involved with something. But even my approach to that is very much, okay, I have to be more self-critical and decide that I have full faith in every single player that I've worked with, right? Like I have 100% believe that this player can be the best X, Y, or Z. So it's always kind of down to what am I doing that isn't making that person get to that position, right? Mm-hmm. So it's always down to that philosophy rather than other stuff.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty positive thing to, especially in like your career, doing that. So you kind of mentioned like having like an individual effect. One of the things I've often wondered with esports journalism is, does this have an effect on the actual scene? Like sometimes it feels like maybe it does, but I feel like a lot of times, based on like what I've seen, it almost like it doesn't matter a lot of times. Like it doesn't seem to have systematic change a lot of times. What do you think about that?
So I think for sure, esports journalism has both more and less of an impact than you think. So one thing is that a lot of team owners browse Reddit. Like this is not a lot of people on Reddit say, oh, obviously these guys know more than we do, so we should just trust what they're saying. But a lot of times, like what the popular Reddit consensus, I'm not saying it decides things, but it has like a little bit more power than you think it is, just because it's like, this is the general way in which teams interact with their constituents. They're very concerned with fan perception, things along those lines. So I do think that if you get something that's on Reddit, and Reddit controls so much, or has so much power actually, in and of itself. So if you create something that gets on Reddit, you can start conversations pretty easily. You can impact a lot of what team owners and managers think. Without realizing it. So all sorts of stuff like this, I think, can have an impact. I think, especially one thing that I think is really lacking is just good investigative journalism in sports. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I've thought about a lot myself, is like, if I went back to journalism now, I would maybe focus more on that, because I think that this is like a very powerful tool. And perhaps some of the times when we feel like journalism doesn't have that much power in esports is because we're missing like this kind of important investigative arm. To talk about some of the bigger problems, like things that people just don't really talk about because we don't have that kind of voice right now.
Yeah, I mean, the only people who really do investigative journalism off the top of my head, like come to mind, is like Richard Lewis, Jacob Wolf. There's a couple. There's one that works for someplace. I cannot remember her name. God, what is her name? She did the piece on Riot. I feel terrible for not remembering.
Oh, right. Polygon? Yeah, I can't remember her specific name either. But it's stuff like that. Obviously, that had a very profound effect, at least so far as we know. A lot of people came out of the woodwork just talk about this topic. And I think it's important that people did talk about it. Regardless of what their opinion is, this is something that definitely needed to be considered, because this has like always been the back and forth struggle. Is this like, are women underrepresented? Are they discriminated against? All of these sorts of things, like this idea that Riot is punishing toxicity in the community, all of that stuff just like kind of came to a head over one article. So I think that definitely stuff like that, investigative journalism, there's a lot of stories in the community that I think should be talked about more, but there aren't really the people to kind of pioneer that or go in that direction.
Is there the money for it either? Because it seems like every news publication that is not ESPN, and like Polygon's been around for quite a while now, but basically every other one that you've kind of seen come through, Slingshot, even Yahoo, like a lot of their media sites just kind of closed down, and there doesn't seem to be a money investment for it. So is there an ROI that is not Disney, which just has an ungodly amount of money that they could throw anywhere?
So if you want to start in esports journalism right now, you definitely need a different 9-to-5. I'll say it straight up, you need to be doing something else for your full-time income. So you need to be starting in that position. I'm in kind of a unique position where I felt like I decided to leave and go straight into the industry now. I have like enough recommendations and enough credibility where I could probably live off of freelance in esports journalism, which is incredibly rare. If you want to start out doing it, you definitely can't say, okay, I'm quitting my job today and I'm just going to write articles, because that's not going to work. You have to be willing to spend your free time developing this kind of passion and looking to see like what kind of money you can make for it now. Kind of going through and riding the waves of whatever site is popular and is about to close down in the next 3 months or whatever is going on there. You kind of have to ride those checks until you have enough people who will pass forward your recommendations to the next place. So yeah, I definitely think that there's risk to it. I also think that if you want to be an esports journalist, there's way more glamour in being someone like Thorn, who is able to make comments about what is happening in the game, or talk to people who's making comments about what's happening in the game, or who's providing a platform. Like, I think what Thorn does is really excellent journalism in a lot of ways. Like people like yourself who provide a platform for people to express their opinions. That I think is in a way kind of more attractive, because it's like you get to hear interesting stories, you get to be involved, you get to have a lot of the a lot of good things about esports journalism. And obviously, I was more on that side, right? I was able to have opinions and express my opinions on X, Y, and Z, and all these things that I was more interested in. Whereas investigative journalism is much less glamorous in a lot of ways. You have to be scared all the time that what you're publishing, you didn't fact check completely correctly, or there's one piece, maybe 2 of your sources are actually talking to the person, and I didn't do enough due diligence in that area. You have to be like really, really sure all the time that what you're publishing is correct, because you could hurt people. You could hurt a lot of people. You could hurt not just beyond your reputation, but the reputations of people in the industry, which I think you should care about more if you're getting involved in this. Like, that has to kind of be your motivating factor, is caring about the space and caring about the space being a better place rather than yourself. And so that becomes like very selfless, because almost every other esports journalist has been maligned, has been like attacked by teams, has been attacked by players, has been attacked by Redditors for saying something that is true, but has like a very gigantic impact. Like, regardless of whether what you're saying is true or not, people are going to say it's not, right? You have to be 100%. Prepared for that. You have to be prepared for that. And I think that that's why investigative journalism, especially in the esports scene, when journalists right now don't have a lot of credibility from the get-go, and honestly, the barrier entry to journalism is like, okay, I have a webcam and microphone, and I contacted someone on Twitter and they're down to do a podcast, right? That's like that is the barrier to entry to journalism and the esports scene. So it is kind of hard to get people to trust you from the off. And so as a stepping stone, investigative journalism, you have to have contacts, you have to have all these things. And it's like, all right, once I've built up all this contacts, all these networks, do I want to alienate them by publishing dirt, right? That's another big thing. So I think that's why it's just really difficult. Like, I would say that someone like Jacob Wolf right now, he doesn't publish a lot of like really, really hard-hitting investigative news. And he mostly does like roster announcements. Those are most of the pieces that come out from Jacob Wolf. And I don't know what kind of information he gets on other stuff, but if like what he is doing, like, allows him to get that kind of information, and that's his platform, and he's providing like that kind of information to the people, and he doesn't feel like confident to release like some of the other stuff, maybe, or he doesn't have like, or there's not exactly the support or the sources to do that kind of thing. Maybe he loses access to, he hurts ESPN. Maybe he hurts ESPN, and people like Emily Rand and Tyler can't do interviews because he's publishing something, right? And then he's hurting the ability for them to make articles. So there are all sorts of questions that you kind of have to ask yourself.
Is that just because the scene's so
before
young?
you're ready to do investigative journalism? I think that's definitely part of it. Because again, it's
hopefully get better.
You don't have someone coming in with an independent reputation, right? You don't have someone coming in who already has a reputation for what I say is fact. You don't have someone. Also, I think teams and orgs have a lot of power just by the way that the scene is run, because you have the old examples of, obviously, like, any team has a way more developed content team, like, than any of these publications can compete with. They can, like, I think my 100 Thieves production team just won awards. We had an insane amount of YouTube deliveries, like all the sorts of things. And so I think a lot of times teams tell themselves that they don't need independent media. And I think you're seeing some of the backlash on teams like TSM, for example, that have told themselves for a really long time that they don't need independent media, and no one is kind of jumping to defend TSM right now. There's that side of it too, and I think we'll see more of that as the scene develops. But right now, I think it's very, very team favored in a lot of ways in terms of the power versus training.
Yeah, that's almost a very interesting concept. We're looking at all of, like, the amount of control that teams actually have in comparison to maybe different things in the world, and it's definitely changed as franchising kind of hit, because like the power that maybe some teams had or Riot has is almost very unheard of comparative to any sort of sports like analogy, right? Like, it's so much different. Like, Riot being an IP holder of the game that they have, or Blizzard being an IP holder of the games that they have, gives them a unique set of power that you just don't see in any sort of professional sports. And it makes the whole the dynamic and how you're going to approach things, I think, drastically different. So it's an interesting thought. So one of the things I want to ask you is, you have something very unique about you. Hopefully this is true too. I'm like so worried now that all the stuff that I looked up on you is just going to be wrong.
Only had one thing wrong. Unfortunately, it was the first thing that you said. So
my wrong rate, that is, honest to God, the first piece of information I think I have gotten wrong on a guess so far. So I'm like freaking out now a little bit. So you went to college for economics, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Going through high school, what made you kind of gravitate towards economics? Because that's a very interesting career path to want to go into. Be like, oh, you know what I want to do? I want to go for economics.
Yeah, I think so. I've always kind of felt that, so this is sort of weird, but my take is that the Federal Reserve is actually the most powerful thing in America, right? Which makes it, like, depending on your stance, I don't want to come off too, like, ignorant or whatever, but that makes it the most powerful kind of branch of the world, right? So for me, the Federal Reserve, because of, like, so Milton Friedman is someone probably a lot of people have heard of, but he might be too old for a lot of people watching this. But Milton Friedman was a big economist who wrote a lot about the Great Depression, studied a lot of the Great Depression, and he's known to some as kind of like the father of monetarism. So I read a history of monetarism from the great 1920s to 1980s, I think, is specifically the book. And I read that in high school. And
it's a very interesting reading topic. Really, I was reading The Hobbit, but you were reading.
I was fascinated by a lot of, like, his arguments for how, like, the access and flow of money and the money supply was basically responsible for so much that happened. So you think about, like, everyone tries to explain economics in terms of supply and demand side, whereas, like, the idea of money as a separate resource is something that isn't just a store of value, but something that can control a whole lot. Like, inflation itself, as a driving force of economic success, and how you can kind of control that independently of the goods market, is something that I found, like, really fascinating and interesting. I also wrote a thesis on, like, my senior thesis in high school on the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. So the idea of, like, religion being linked to capitalism and the rise of these two forces in, like, kind of a historical context. So I found, like, all of those aspects fascinating for me in terms of, like, money controls the world. I don't know, it's a very stereotypical thing to say, but
yeah.
So I was very interested in that topic in particular. And then when I was in university, it was during the financial crisis. So was like a very exciting time to also be studying this. Kind of.
I like how you say exciting during it's the same way that I think serial killers are super interesting people to learn about, because I have a degree in psych. I feel like those are like the equivalencies there. Like I'm just like, oh my god, I love learning about like Jeffrey Dahmer, which is just a weird thing to say because the dude is insane. But I mean, it's
I mean, we have movies like The Wolf of Wall Street, and we have movies about serial killers. So equally, you can put a spin on anything and make it sexy for Hollywood.
That is a true statement. So you wanted to do economics. Where did you what made you pick the school that you went to? What made you want to go to this school?
So University of Chicago had a very big reputation for economics, in particular. So like obviously Milton Friedman.
Yep. That's where he taught, right?
So
he taught at the University of Chicago, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he taught at the University of Chicago, so that was like a very big draw for me.
Okay.
I also appreciated the way that the university, it's like kind of a very kind of arrogant way, but the University of Chicago's approach to teaching is we don't teach applied anything. We teach math. We teach physics. We teach they're very, very kind of broad physical majors. You don't have finance. Finance is not a major. Or at least it wasn't when I was there. It wasn't a major at the University of Chicago. Business is not a major at the University of Chicago. It's like economics, math, physics. You didn't have really engineering either. You studied physics or you studied chemistry. I thought this was kind of cool to me because it's like all very theoretical. Slowly over time, I realized that that's not super applicable to anything that you want to do in the real world. It was very much like a school for academics. Right?
Yeah.
In that sense. So, but I think the valuable thing about the University of Chicago ethic was like the way in which you kind of had to learn to learn. Like the way the philosophy towards like thinking and the way to think about problems was, I think, probably the most valuable thing I got from there.
Yeah. Did you get to eat lots in Chicago? Did you take deep dish pizza?
I love, okay, so I'm also, I was also the president of the culinary club at University of Chicago.
I'm actually from the Midwest area, so I've been to Chicago a lot. So
Chicago is like one of the food capitals of the country, for sure.
Good.
It was like a really cool place to be in because obviously as a poor college student, I didn't have a lot of my own money to spend on this, but it's like, I could apply to get a budget to get us to have a class from the second highest rated sommelier in the city, right? And learn about wine and not have to pay for it, right? So
that is like the most genius thing ever.
It's the way in which I got to meet like a lot of food people. Got to meet got to learn a lot about something that I was really passionate about in that sense as well.
Yeah. And it's cold in Chicago. It's really cold. I don't like the cold. I grew up in northern Michigan, and Chicago is way worse. Like we get way more snow in northern Michigan, like 200 to 300 inches on average. But I would still rather have that than Chicago cold because it just like cuts through you. It is so vicious. Ugh.
Yeah, a lot of people say, okay, because I was from Colorado. It's like, all right, you should be used to it being cold because every once in a while you get the news blasts of 10 feet of snow in Denver, those types of things. But Colorado is very dry. So when it's cold, it's not like the cut through your bones kind of cold that it is in Chicago. So Chicago is very humid, very wet.
Yeah, it is not particularly pleasant. So you mentioned that Milton Friedman was one of your people that you looked up to, like almost like people that you really gravitated towards. Were you able to take a lot of these ideas from economics and from Milton Friedman and theoretically apply them or start to apply them to the esports world?
So I always had this kind of idea of, like, I'd like to do a series using economic concepts to explain video games. Like, for example, the way that I understood gold, like when you have gold in League of Legends.
Yeah.
Any sort of interest, right? Mm-hmm. You back. So you're always incentivized to spend as much gold as you have because any gold you're holding on to is like losing value relative to the gold that you could be using, stuff like this. So also like the value of a certain amount is constantly changing as the game progresses, because 400 gold on your first pack buys you Doran's item or whatever.
Yeah.
But when you keep going on, that item sucks, right?
Yeah.
As the game keeps progressing, that item sucks. So 400 gold is not worth that much relative to the state of the game. So stuff like that is like stuff I wanted to actually do content on. I considered doing content on just like using these fundamental ideas too. It's like, can we analyze League of Legends in a more rudimentary way that helps us better understand? Even now, like I've always been working off and on this sort of item database that uses the value of the item at a different time in the game based on the average amount of gold that this character has in this lane, etc., using like as much data from the API as possible. Like these types of things that I want to build off of more as tools for teams or whatever else. Like all of this is kind of basic to me, but yeah, things like that I've considered doing. I did a really basic article ages ago when there was like the quote unquote Chinese bubble, where I was explaining like what a bubble is to people and stuff like that. So there are certain ways in which I've found to apply it, but like I said, I think more of like what I got from my education and application to esports is just kind of a more critical way of thinking about stuff.
Do you think that esports is eventually going to get to a point where it is mostly data driven? Because a lot of times, I know for Overwatch, a lot of people complain about the data and like being able to apply the data is not really there. Like there's so much, like reading the data is so hard. And I've heard the same thing with League of Legends, though it sounds like League of Legends is getting better as kind of time goes on. Do you think that it's eventually going to get to a point where it is actually data driven?
So I think it's hard to talk about that in competitive terms.
Yeah.
Because I think that patches change so much, and the amount of competitive games we have on a patch, it's difficult. But I think that there's so much resource just in terms of how many games are being played like per day all over the world and in different locations and stuff like this. In terms that we can use that data, it's just mind-boggling hard to access. Mind-bogglingly hard to access right now. For a lot of people, and a lot of people kind of express that. I think a lot of it is also people are using data in really counterproductive ways, are meaningless. So a lot of data statistics that come out are just effectively not useful for anything. Like people have stopped using KDA that much, thank God. Like no one hardly ever mentions KDA anymore, but for a while people did all the time, and I was like, why? What is the point of this data point? Stuff like using kind of motion detection and gosh, I'm not like machine learning to kind of get the image of a character on a mini map and talking about like their reset timing and stuff like that could be converted to a data point if you think about it. If you think about stuff like this, I think you can get more to a more advanced place with data. But I do think because of the patch stuff, you're more limited in League than you are in a lot of traditional sports where it doesn't really, the game doesn't really change fundamentally.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the machine learning and kind of using visual points because I actually had like the person in Overwatch who built Winston's lab out, which is this huge like data, and that's what actually he used. They used all on-screen data because they didn't have the API from Blizzard, so he literally built out this thing that would measure different useful kind of measurements for Overwatch, and it's kind of surprising that you mentioned that for League because I'm actually surprised it isn't already kind of like really functioned out and built. So
people have worked on stuff like that, but the difficulty, at least when I talk to people who are working on this kind of thing, is capturing minion wave states. Because looking at the mini map, because you have such small. Like a small ability to kind of track what the wave is doing, or to get a read on, to be able to reliably say, okay, is the wave pushing that way? And I think like honestly. Wave manipulation is such a gigantic part of League of Legends that until we can get something that can give us descriptive statistics relative to what waves are doing, we basically don't have use. So.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So one of the things about you going to college and you getting a degree in economics is you actually worked in the economic field very briefly, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was it that you were doing when you finally got into the job that you got after getting your economics degree?
So I worked for the IMF.
Yeah.
So I worked in the tax department for the IMF, so it's super glamorous. Technically, I was like a research assistant. I think was my
Yeah.
official title. There's so many research assistant, research administrator, research whatever. But I
Yeah.
think it was research assistant was my first job. So initially, my intention was to work on kind of some of the I had my honors thesis and work on that and go back to grad school. So that was like kind of my initial intention. Uh, I ended up just working on a ton of tax databases that and just building those
Yeah.
and working on data and providing data to like there's a department of like 30 economists.
Yeah.
So providing data to those and sitting in on some of those meetings, learning to use like some of the software that they had and helping them kind of come to their conclusions. Uh, I think I had like one byline because I wrote one methodology paragraph somewhere. But it was an interesting thing because I got to talk to a lot of different people, learn the way a lot of tax systems all over the world.
Yeah.
That was kind of my first exposure to because I was really like interested in kind of the international economic system, how a lot of different things worked. I thought the IMF was like a pretty good fit for me at the time, but
So what happened as you were going through? Did you fall out of love with economics? Did you just fall out of love with taxes? What happened?
so I think I just became very invested in League.
Uh-huh.
Just I I started playing League kind of just out of college, which is very different for most people, right? Because it's
Mhm.
just okay. Well, they say during college or during high school, but for me, obviously, I'm a bit older, so the
Yeah.
game wasn't even kind of alive
You don't
until
look a
my
day
last year
past
of
21.
university. Until my last year of university, I think was when League was launched. So I started playing it out of university, and I was just like really fascinated by, I guess, the highest level of play
Yeah.
and ways in which players were able to do stuff. So when I was able to watch professional tournaments and all this sort of thing, at the same time, I was, for reasons I'd rather not discuss, kind of jaded with things that were happening in my field and in my
Yeah.
industry. And I mean, in retrospect, I think these things were kind of solvable, but that combination of circumstances, I just became like very invested in the best way.
Okay. So you start getting invested in League of Legends. Did you ever think
Mhm.
about like earlier on kind of working on being a coach and working up to being a coach in an esports team? Because you obviously took the more working with journalism and then moving into coaching.
So there were for I had like some personal reasons for not immediately wanting to jump into coaching. One was that I didn't get offered. One was like kind of my own abilities. I felt okay. I don't really know anything.
Okay.
Also, coaching itself was very young. I think at the time it was like coaching is basically someone to be in the room, right?
Yeah.
Because Riot thinks it makes them look more professional or whatever. That was basically what coaching was at the beginning. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm getting way more writing. Also, I continued to have a full time job in other fields, and there were personal reasons why I couldn't drop that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I was basically for a while not just paying for myself. So I had like other responsibilities to attend to in that regard. So I wasn't able to kind of take any of those offers or just drop everything.
Hmm.
I was able to get a full time position working for the score eventually
Yeah.
in 2015. So that was like really good, really exciting for me. And so I just kept doing that, and I like being a loud person, even though I don't seem like that initially. It's just I kind of like kind of living out this weird fantasy of being loud, where I talked about before is like where I didn't really want to interact with people much, but it's just before I just want my opinion to be heard in some way sometimes, which is also very arrogant. Like both of those are very arrogant things.
Yeah.
In some regard, it's just shouting into the void, was in some ways satisfying for me, but then after a while I realized that shouting into the void isn't that exciting. I stopped getting coaching offers as much later just because there were way more people who kind of accepted them.
Yeah. So you actually had coaching offers early on.
Yeah, I had very, very early on before pre-franchising for sure. I had coaching offers and just teams like in Challenger Series, teams in LCS, all sorts of people just kind of like at the time. When I say that I had coaching offers, I don't consider it like a huge prideful thing or an accomplishment.
Yeah.
I felt like people were just like throwing darts at the wall. It's like, oh, you have Twitter followers, you talk about League.
Yeah.
You like to coach 17-year-olds. Do you think I'm qualified? Like, really? Do you think so?
I almost feel like it's like the like the American like we want you picture, like just throwing it out to the wind.
Just someone, please, for the love of God, you have a pulse. Here you go.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So there were like a lot of factors at the time, but for sure that was a big thing. I think also kind of early on, I was really invested in 2014. I was really invested in like the LPLEN project.
Yeah.
And really invested in the Chinese scene. And to me, it was like, okay, if I work for an NA or an EU team, I'm probably going to have less time for something else, right? And so I was really invested in this idea of like kind of owning the broadcast, like the English broadcast for the LPL. Like that was a really cool thing for me. So yeah. That's when about around the time when I got probably the bulk of my offers was like 2014.
Okay. Did you ever think about maybe going the like analyst desk route? Like, was that ever a thought? Like, I just want to be on the right analyst desk permanently.
For me, that was definitely something I was interested in at the beginning, because I think almost everyone getting into the league was kind of interested in being the next Monte Cristo, right?
Yeah.
And around that time period, like when OGN 2012, 2013 launched, this was like the appealing job, right?
Yeah.
The cool job for journalists, analysts, commentators. So that was definitely part of that, which occurred to me. But it was like, I think very early on, and I don't necessarily blame them, but Riot just said she doesn't have broadcast personality, right? And I was dismissed pretty early on in that regard. I've had considerations back and forth on that as well. As like, is this something? If I really, really wanted to do this, right, I could spend a lot of time just practicing casting, just practicing talking about VODs, putting out a ton of videos. To an extent, I've put out a lot of videos, and I sort of made a run for it a little bit last year. It's just a video every day, just practice talking about the game in front of a camera.
Yeah.
So there are definitely, if I wanted to do it, I could really, really hard and get some initial casting jobs, just do some stuff like that. So it's crossed my mind, but it's not really something I want to do right now.
Okay. I mean, I think that that's fair. So kind of looking at your trajectory through, what was the moment where you were like, I don't want to do journalism anymore. I really want to do coaching. What made you actually take that leap after so long of telling people like, no, I don't want to do this. I was thinking about doing the cast for us, but I don't want to. What made you want to jump back into that ring?
I think it was just, I really enjoyed kind of talking more and more to players. It was a slow process thing, somewhere between 2016 and 2018, right? I ended up talking to more players, either in person or in some kind of capacity or trajectory. I think coaching was always something that I kind of wanted to do, but never really was the right opportunity that I was really engaged in. So I guess it was just, okay, I got offered the East UK position, and I said, okay, you know what, this might be one of the last offers I ever get if I say no now, right? I said, all right, I'm going to do the analyst thing, and I'm going to see where it goes.
So one of the things I want to ask you is you seem very analytical. You seem like analytics are definitely like some of your strong points. Did you have to, like, are you also good with like the soft skills, talking to people, understanding feelings, more of the subjective things? Is that something you're also good at, or is that something you had to kind of like build up and work on?
Yeah, like I said, I think I came at a disadvantage because I never really bothered to work on those skills. So I would say that that's not my strongest suit, but it's something that, like I said, I think that by no means, just to go back to the previous point, do I think that I'm analyst desk ready right now, right? Not at all. It would definitely be something that I'd have to say, okay, I want to do this and I want to work really hard on.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel the same way about social stuff and coaching and more interpersonals with players. And it's just, I want to talk to players more. I want to be able to help them, because I guess one of my biggest motivations for coaching is just feeling like I don't necessarily feel like I'm the best person to help players get better, right?
Yeah.
I'm not the best person to do that. But no, more people need to try, right? More people need to really, really try and to put a lot of effort and work into it. So that's something that it's like, okay, I acknowledge that I have a weakness in this area. I just have to continue to get better. I have to think more about emotional situations, not necessarily how I would feel in the situation, but how other people would feel in the situation, and kind of try to come from it from that standpoint. If I attack it like a puzzle, then emotions are easier for
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I really appreciate that. That's something you're like, you know what? If it's something that I'm not strong in, I'm gonna at least work on it, which I think is a lot more than a lot of people are willing to say. Kind of looking at that, one of the things that I've always kind of struggled with, and I don't like, part of me understands it because it's business, and part of me doesn't care that it's business is still wrong, is I feel like a lot of times players are more treated like objects or tools rather than actual people. Especially like when you look at like long-term growth, there's a lot of ideas out there that players cannot sustain long-term careers. And based on that, it's more of like we use them until they burn up and then we just replace them. Do you think that that's a common sentiment? And do you think that that's the correct sentiment?
So I think going back to your initial.
Oh, hang on there. I think we cut out. There we go. I think we're good.
Okay. Going back to one of your initial questions, teaching responsibility alongside the game and everything else. This is one of my biggest struggles with that, is because I think players who are in the academy system, and this is the first thing they're doing out of high school in a lot of situations, or some of them did a couple of years of university, and honestly, university doesn't really simulate life experiences either. It does it better than being home and in high school with your parents, but it still doesn't really fairly do that. So I'd like for there to be more ways in which academy in particular kind of prepares players for alternative career paths, right? So I would like to see more ways in that regard, more things that they can do. Maybe academy programs partnering with universities would be something that we could discuss more, or something that I've definitely thought about. But so that's like kind of one of the things on my end, is because I definitely think that League of Legends should be something that you can say, okay, I really want to make this career, and I put so much time into it, and I'm going to burn myself out playing all this stuff. That if that isn't the life that you want after being an academy team for 1 year, we need to make it easier for there to be transitionary options. And teaching responsibility is definitely something that's along those veins. So thinking about players more as people is definitely, I wouldn't say that that's a failing. In some regards, I would say that maybe there's a lot of talk about work-life balance that I don't agree with. But I would say that there can be more reasonable ways in which to approach the ideas of self-responsibility. So I think that that's definitely something to bring up and discuss more. I don't know. It's
can we
hit in terms of burnout.
Yeah, I was just saying, can we hit that cliffhanger of work-life balance a little bit, and like, what are your thoughts on work-life balance?
So I think in terms of work-life balance, so a lot of times you do kind of have to decide between what is the best balance for competitive excellence, what ways in which can we make practice better, so that it isn't just grinding games nonstop. And I think there's definitely more that can be done in that regard. But I also think that a lot of times, like compared to some other regions, maybe North America overinvests too much in work-life balance. So there are some goods, and there are some sides that you can take, and some in different issues, and some other sides that you can't. But Actually, I think self-responsibility is a really big one
Yeah.
because a lot of it comes down to self-responsibility for me, because if you have someone who's constantly waking you up in the morning and taking you to practice and you don't have to think about that yourself, you're not asking yourself the question, is this really something I want to be doing, right?
Yeah.
You're not asking yourself you're not the one who's deciding to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
And I actually think there is a big difference there, right? If you're the one who setting your own alarm clock, you're deciding what time to get up, you're deciding you want to go into work on time so that you can do your warm-up solo queue game or whatever else. I think there's a big difference between that and being woken up, put on the same like bus or whatever with everyone else, and it's just you're going through the motions in a way. Whereas affirming like kind of every day that this is the career you want, this is what you're going to give your all to, you're going to practice 10, 14 hours a day. And as long as you're making that kind of decision and you're taking your own self-responsibility for it, I think you're going to get more out of it. It's definitely like a small mental thing, but I think it really matters.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree. Like there's a value system that you're then upholding, right? When you decide that you're going to be the one to get up, you're saying that the value system I want to hold, I'm actually working on and actually utilizing it, versus if someone else is doing it, do I really want to be here? Is this a value of wanting to be the best? So it's kind of like conflicting value systems that are happening there. So I understand that. I don't know if I know for Overwatch, I can speak about Overwatch. I can't speak about League. I know that for Overwatch, some of the practicing and work-life balance was, I would say, a little bit off for Western players and what they can handle. Because for me, it's always about who is like your weakest link almost, and that's kind of what you have to play with. And that's not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but whoever your weakest link is, you kind of have to manage that line. You want to push it as close to the line as possible, but there are definitely some people who do not watch that line or don't care. Which makes an interesting quandary of like how much practice is too much, how much isn't, and what should we be putting out? Because Eastern cultures, 100% from what I know, practice way more than like Western cultures. Is that bad or good? I don't really know. I know that for what we're taught culturally growing up, I think we have to take into account for. And I think that that's more of it for me, is that these players aren't growing up in the same cultural lifestyle. Can they get to that same point?
I think for sure, before we even start talking about like practice in terms of quantity, we have to be talking about practice quality first.
Oh,
and
God,
I think
yes.
there's not enough discussion about that topic.
I think that's, for me, that's the bigger importance, is we focus too much on quantity and not enough on quality.
And that's why I bring up like the self-responsibility thing in terms of choosing that you're going to do this, because there are so many times where if you're being told like you're getting up now, you're going to play now, I'm almost doing everything except physically lifting you and putting you in your chair, and now you're going to play a solo queue game. In all of that process, if a lot of that decision making is being taken from you, that like kind of subtle, almost in a way you feel like you don't have a choice, but you actually, right?
Yeah.
If that is being taken from you, then you're also not going to think about the goals of practice, right? You're not going to be thinking of, what am I going to accomplish today? You're going to be in bed. Like everyone has that moment in most jobs where they're laying in bed and they're thinking, okay, I could just call in sick today, right? Like honestly, what happens if I call in sick? A lot of people have this thought, or at least every once in a while, right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter if I call in sick today. Like what am I honestly going to get? And then you think about, okay, well, this has to be done today, right? This would be my goal for today, and that's how you get out of bed, and that's how you choose to go do your job.
Yeah.
I think if players like have that kind of talk with themselves mentally, then they're going to go in and maybe their goal is, I'm going to think about the first 3 waves and what I'm going to do on the first 3 waves, and my goal is to achieve what I set out to do on the first 3 waves, and I'm going to improve my life that way, right?
Yeah.
If players have that moment where they have to think of their own goals and literally have their own goals, I think that improves the quality of practice. And then after that, we can start talking quantity. And when does quantity matter? All of these other factors. But I do think that especially in North America, there aren't enough conversations about quality of practice.
Yeah, I think that's my issue, is like, I would like to see that conversation shift more to the quality. How do we improve the quality? And you actually mentioned goal setting there, which I think is huge, because I know a lot of players that are incapable of goal setting. Like, it is actually astounding how common that is. Like, self goals that are not actuated just by winning or losing. Like, a lot of players, that's all that they care about is like the winning or losing, which is a very poor goal system to set because it's really hard to learn on that, because it's even in the realm of that, it's too big. It's too big to worry just about winning or losing, because there's all these micro things that you have to worry about as you kind of go through.
You said that you're more focused on psychology and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that something you want to do in the esports scene more?
I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I actually work with private clients, so I still do that.
Not
I
really.
worked with, huh?
So your answer is not really, or
No.
But yeah.
If a team offered me a job and they offered it in a way that I thought was beneficial, I would consider it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's the thing, is like, I think that ideally, if my position is to be brought in, it needs to be working alongside coaches and working with coaches a lot of times, to get the best out of what my job should be. I also come from a mental health background, which is very different than people like Weldon or these other people. So I have a very different approach, and I think, of my ability and what I should be doing versus some of the stuff that is media based from them. I think they're very good at marketing, but as far as what they do, I don't really know. So I am entertaining offers. There's a couple teams that have reached out to me, so we'll see. I'll never put it past me, because I want to help people, and so whatever allows me to help people, I think, is kind of the most important thing, which is odd for esports, because that's why I like having conversations like this, because I like to gauge like, where are other people and how do we start to bring up these discussions, because I don't think anyone else is. So
would you say that for you, like when you talk about quality of practice, what are, I guess, things that come to your mind that, from your experience, like even in Overwatch League, that players could work on, or that team?
I think it's individual goal setting is probably one of the biggest things, and learning, and like goal setting for the week, and having a way to measure what they're doing to feel good about those things that are not just winning or losing. Because you need to move your motivation and your validation from being just strictly external to being internal. And I think a lot of players really struggle with that. And so that would be one of the biggest things, is like, what are these little things that we can work on that we can feel good about ourselves that are not tied to winning or losing? And that's probably one of the biggest things that would kind of come in there. And then there's like little things with like emotional intelligence, because I think that a lot of players don't really understand emotions at all, which is, I think, fairly common just in gaming in general. And so like working on like that, like, how do I start to understand what's happening to me? What are the emotional processes that are happening when events occur, and how do I stop them from affecting my like mentality as well as my gameplay? So those are probably some of the bigger things. I want to see it get more data driven, but I don't know if it's possible with meta shifting. That's honestly, I think, one of the biggest things, is like a game like any other sports game, it's literally been the same game for like how many freaking years. And so it's a lot easier to come up with this. I want to see it get more data driven, but I don't know if it ever will. And I would like to, one of the things that I noticed with a lot of coaches is they actually don't set goals. What they do is they do a lot more reactive coaching, where a problem happens and then they just try to correct it. And I think that that's kind of a fundamental problem when we talk about quality, is it's not going in with a plan and trying to work on things.
So I guess when you say you want it to be more data-driven, do you mean in terms of being able to use data to assess whether or not goals are met in practice? Or
yes. Yeah, as far as like that would be it, as well as help dictate like what are things that we need to improve on. I would like to see that kind of too coming in. I just don't know if it will. I think
that, so yeah, there are definitely like certain database ways to do that. I think, like, for example, when I talk about with like what I want to do on the first wave, you can ask a player like, what do you want to do on this wave when you're loading into the screen, and then you can say, okay, you achieved that or you didn't. There are a lot of ways that you can do that. Just things like, every game I'm going to talk about Herald at 10 minutes. Right, if you're the top laner or the jungler, it's a
you just check it on
every
and
game.
off.
I'm going to say that, and you just check it. Or
I want them to care about it enough where they don't have to be reminded to do it. Like
like
I think that's one of the things, is like getting to the point where they understand what are these skills and learning these like very, I think, underutilized skills that I think you pick up as you kind of get older in life and realize that if I want to be successful, this is what I kind of need to do. I want to see a lot more of those skills get taught to players, I think. And I think coaching staff, too. I think there's a lot of coaching staff who could benefit from that, too. So.
Yeah, I think some of the best teachers I've had haven't actually taught me. If that makes sense. Like, they make me do the problem myself.
Yeah.
And
almost give you the answer.
Right? Yeah. So I think that those are, or sometimes they don't even set the problem, right? It has to be something that you have to independently be interested in solving.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I don't know how you, being on a time, I think the biggest problem with that is that the fact that everything is time-based. So if you look at like a season, right, you only have this much time to do that. Like, how much do you want to risk not giving them the problem at the very least?
No. I mean, like, there obviously are talked about goal setting thing, right? Which is like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Like, what do you want to work on today? Like, what do you think your failings are? Because I can tell you, I can give you a laundry list, right? But it's like something that I want you to really care about improving, and something that has been bothering, something that you're going to be really motivated to.
Yeah,
I think always has better results. Obviously, players don't always acknowledge what they're fucking up, and they're not even always aware of what they're fucking up. If they were, I probably wouldn't even have a job. So, I mean,
that's like if players understood themselves or emotions. Yeah.
I remember, like, I did an interview last year that was like, I asked players what they think went wrong or something like that, and it made it sound like I didn't I didn't do anything, which is the flip side of these types of conversations. But you have to understand, kind of in moderation, how much of a rapport that you can have with players in terms of, like, I can tell you what I think you fucked up, but I would rather you tell me this, because if you're walking yourself through the solution, you'll remember it better. Right?
Exactly. If you can walk yourself through it, or if you can teach other people it, it's just kind of general learned behavior that you can pick things up more. Brings me to an interesting question for you. What do you think are the major issues in esports? So obviously mental health is kind of a big one for me. I'm kind of on that platform of mental health. Overwatch League next year is a terrifying thought because they're traveling every single week for like 27 weeks. I think so. It's Call of Duty League, which is terrifying. But what do you think are some big issues in esports or League of Legends specifically?
Major issues, I think sometimes we solutions and possibilities as not possible before they're explored, which is really interesting to me, because it's very unscientific in a lot of ways, where it's like we immediately kind of react to, this is the solution, or this is what we should do. It's really funny because a lot of teams have modeled, a lot of teams in NA in particular, or like, you could even see EU to an extent, China to an extent, having worked in those scenes, have modeled what they do after not even what Korean teams do, but what they think Korean teams do, without verifying what Korean teams do. And a lot of it is just really fascinating. In a lot of ways, is that would even end up being something that you do. It's like that you're going to throw so much money at something that you don't even bother to fact check, right? I think that there are a lot of just jumping to solutions or assumptions being made and then carried through very kind of inefficiently. That ends up being a pretty core problem, very structurally, that is then difficult to fix, because you have all of these problems that are already built up that you kind of have to, like, kind of rebuild after you're already sitting on top of them. So that's an interesting one for sure. Like, for example, the idea that Korean coaching was the reason why Korean teams were good was an idea that was perpetuated for years, right?
Yeah.
If you talk to anyone who's actually experienced Korean coaching, like Huki, for example, was a player that I worked with recently, and he said the very first time I had a coach try to talk to me about the game was in North Korea, right? So a lot of Korean coaches are very much kind of like skill, right? And they're maybe setting a structure, they're setting a timeline, but a lot of this is just very player driven, player run. Like, a lot of the schedules, a lot of what they want to do, a lot of play the game is very player driven, player runs. a lot of these assumptions that were made at the very beginning, and then a lot of the Korean coaches that got imported, right, ended up not really being the solution. So I think it's just a really interesting place to be in now. And a lot of the more successful Korean coaches actually ended up having to adapt in more like American ways to a more American situation. So I think that that's a really interesting situation for sure.
It's interesting that the cultural aspect I feel like isn't as talked about as much as it should be. Because I think that almost describes everything about what's happening is literally, if you just look at the culture of like Korean culture comparative to US culture, that a lot of the stuff that you see or hear about with League of Legends isn't uncommon for any other job field. Right? It's not uncommon the way that they work in other job fields. But then you look at the United States and you're like, I'm just gonna take this and hope that this works.
Oh yeah.
It's not even a correct like evaluation. Is just insane to me that people aren't like, let's build a system that we think works. Do you think that it has to do with the money? Do you think that they're so scared and they've seen something that they think is so successful, like rather than trying to spend like the development fee, like of trying to develop our own system, we're just gonna try to import a system? Do you think it comes down to like money or ignorance?
I think it's just, so you have a certain amount of money. Like the way a lot of VC orgs work is that you have a lot of money flowing in right now. And if you're not using it, it looks like it's kind of inefficient. It starts raising question marks, but there aren't really solutions. So you're gonna have to take time to investigate what the solutions are, but at the same time, like your season's, so you need an answer now because players are going to come in, and a lot of it is also like gaming houses are really. This is probably an example of that a lot already.
Internet's cutting out. No, stop internet, please. Okay, I think we're good. Please, internet God.
It's like a lot of this example of gaming houses has been brought up a lot because obviously people started making gaming houses because the Korean teams all had gaming houses. But gaming houses are more a product of efficiency rather than, okay, this actually makes sense for productivity.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why, that's a really interesting one for sure. And it's also like culturally speaking, a lot of Korean gaming houses, everyone is still living in you still have like all of the teammates living in the same room in bunk beds. And there are so many American players who just straight up refuse that living condition, right? So you have to have a very different environment already. And then the departures from that, it's like, okay, we're very much more used to, I think there's more, I've done a little bit of research on this, but not a ton, so you probably know more. But my understanding is that there's much more of a culture of like coming to work, and then if your work isn't done, you sleep at the office, right? And so at least this occurs like to an extent in China. Where you're just kind of like living at your office.
I've heard that. Yes,
in a sense. So, like to me, it's weird because there's much more about this idea of work-life separation, like the stuff that is ingrained to us from a very young age, that's being brought up, and to an extent, I think like a lot of other cultures struggle with it too. So it's not like it's a huge like China, America, Europe, Korea, Japan, whatever, a divide. It's not like clear cut, because I think it was Japan recently did the experiment with like the 4-day work week, right?
Yeah.
They ran some kind of study where they did like
didn't their productivity go up something like 40% or something crazy?
Yeah. So it's like I would say it's not even necessarily just a centrally cultural based problem. It's just that like there's a certain difference in how we're raised or what expectations we have.
Yeah, I think it's super fascinating to see how it's kind of going. I remember doing a video like very early on when I did videos, and I realized that those type of videos were not for me. I remember doing a video on gaming houses and how bad they were. And just based on like a bunch of other, and I will say, anyone who's ever lived in a fraternity house knows that that's not a bad idea, or that's a bad idea. That you're like, no, this is just a bad idea. Don't do it. That's where I was like, this sounds like a bad idea. I don't think I'd want to be around the people who I live with all the time. So,
and I think it's also interesting because I think that they're way better for younger players, than older players, because I think younger players, again, they kind of require slightly more of a support network
Yep.
It's nice having their teammates around, like some slightly more older, more experienced people that they can talk to, who can help them do stuff like book doctor's appointments and everything else. Whereas older players, they just want you to get the fuck out of their face, and they want to space, they want to go home, they want to be able to have an intimate relationship with another human being without having to pay for a hotel, like an investment banker cheating on his wife.
Yeah,
Lunch, right?
yeah. There are some. I've always said that like your two options are gaming houses or you can do apartments, but either one has some drawbacks, and whichever one you do, you have to make up for the fact that it has of its drawbacks. You need to figure out some way to fix those solutions with those drawbacks. So obviously, privacy and having a sense away from work for Western players is a big one in gaming houses. Being responsible, and because you're upping the responsibility, being in apartments is kind of there, and you have to figure out whichever one you decide to go with. Because I know Overwatch League has a fair amount of gaming houses still. You have to figure out, how do I want to solve these solutions kind of coming in here. So I think that
a lot of times there just isn't kind of the budget, because there's almost
I mean, LA is expensive as like fuck.
There's almost like a universal expectation that the organization takes care of housing, right? There's a universal expectation for that. So, or it's at least to have some kind of stipend to stay monetarily competitive salary with the organizations that have gaming houses. Because it's like, okay, all of your stuff is paid for because of the fact that you're living in the space, and obviously, like, it's not the most ideal living space, but you don't have to worry about that. So that's a lot of your salary that you get to keep, right? That you don't get to keep if the org is not giving you that. So the org at least has to provide some kind of stipend, and then all of that ends up being like could potentially be more expensive to just pay for everyone to have apartments, right? So you have to consider those things as well. And it's like, at what point, how do you compromise? How do you set up the system so that it's better and more attractive for players, and also just a better living situation?
Mm-hmm. So I have an odd question for you. VC funding, is it something that you're happy is in esports, or is it something that scares you? Obviously, it terrifies me. I won't lie. I don't care to say that. We've already seen 2 teams sell. We have Echo Fox that is being sold to EG per reports, and then we also have our Optic, which got sold to Immortals back, which Immortals is just another VC-funded organization too.
So I think VC funding is interesting because I think a lot of people don't really understand, right? They don't understand what VC funding is, which is like VC comes from companies that basically are throwing a bunch of money at the wall and seeing if something sticks.
Yeah.
Like, there's an expectation that there will be a payout later on, and this isn't like sponsorship money, where if you have good sponsors, they are paying for a service that you're running, which is having their brand on whatever jerseys you have, on your content videos, on anything along those, on your player stream. Like, they're paying for that service, so that's a transaction that's being made. Whereas VC is like, we're throwing a bunch of money at you, we're expecting some kind of payout. Obviously, we're not going to ask you to, like, the money doesn't necessarily have to come back. We're expecting some kind of revenue, and if we don't get it, then there's not going to be, like, it's just a shoot off of money, and then the money's gone. And then if the business is no longer sustainable after several years when the money runs out, I mean, you're up in smoke. So that's it. So I think that's a big thing about VC funding that people don't understand, because there was a big outcry when Immortals wasn't accepted into franchising, which everyone was saying, well, look at how much money they have. Look at how lucrative this org is. It's like, that's all VC. Whereas a lot of the other orgs that got in had more sponsorships in their portfolio. And I think that that's like a big thing. People had all these conspiracy theories running around, but I do think that was a factor. So, yeah.
I think
VC does make me super nervous.
It terrifies me. Yeah.
VC makes me super nervous because every off season, there's always some kind of transaction, some kind of salary, or some kind of thing where it's like, people are going to be more reasonable. They're not going to blow all their load. It's just like, you paid that much for what? Yeah. What? And then all of the prices get driven up. All the salaries become really ridiculous. And then you have HUK Rich making videos every week about how people are lying to you and orgs aren't sustainable, because they are, right? Like, no one's making money in this scene, basically. Yeah. So it's just very interesting.
Yeah, it's what I want. This is my ideal world. I want some sports some sports team owner to come in and just be like, you know what? I don't mind dropping 20 million. That's like one player from like the NFL Rams. Like, what's 20 million? I want somebody who just doesn't care about $20 million on a yearly basis. That's what I want.
On a yearly basis, okay, sure.
I mean, okay.
As long as it's a sustainable, continuous source, sure.
Yeah.
But if it's but VC is not that, right? And that's the big difference, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why there are like a lot of really interesting Chinese models, right? Which are much more about like, okay, they get their money from their merchandising, from their net cafe partnership, or something like this that they set up as like a business independent of because esports is not making them money.
Yeah,
it's a gigantic suck, but it can itself be like an advertising vehicle for another business you create that actually makes money.
Yeah.
So that's a which isn't in itself for Riot Games, but is right.
Yeah. So. Do you think? Okay, you kind of already said this. I very recently had an argument with someone that no teams are making money right now, at least from what I know. And watching H2K's Rich's videos, actually, I was like, "There's no way. There's no way anyone's making money." I don't believe it. I don't think merchandising is that good in NA that they are making money off of it. Right. Like you kind of mentioned. Do you kind of hold that same sentiment that no teams are probably making money?
Yeah, I think that I heard the number that like 2 are actually breaking even. I don't know, but no one is making a profit. Is my understanding. Is that no one's
I actually had Grievance on from XL, and he actually said the same thing. He thinks that maybe 2 or 3 are breaking even.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. It still seems like ludicrously impossible to me that anyone break even in this space, but if they are, like, good for them. You know what? It could even be 100 Thieves. That's all I don't fucking know about it. So I mean,
they decided to turn down CWL, so they seem to have some head on their shoulders.
I think though that like 100 Thieves has a really good merchandising branch. Obviously, we do, but in the same vein, like if you look at Chinese teams, their merchandising branches are way more like developed and interesting. So that's like there is still like a pretty big gap between China and America and Europe, very much. Yeah. So Europe.
so yeah. Looking at you and kind of your trajectory into being a head coach and building up talent. Do you have goals to move on to the LCS and eventually be an LCS head coach, or do you prefer being in the academy area and kind of growing that talent and teaching them that?
So I would be interested in an LCS position, but only under kind of like very specific circumstances. I've had conversations about potential LCS positions, but like I said, it's not something that I am right now interested in because I think that the space at the moment needs certain things. Like LCS North America has too much of a gap between solo queue and LCS. And I think that there needs to be a lot of overhaul and a lot of things. There's a gigantic list, I guess you could say, agendas and improvements that I think need to be made before I feel like LCS has a good foundation for it to be internationally competitive. Okay. So that's a big thing for me is that I feel like our talent base needs people who care about them, kind of. So that's why I'm more interested in academy and basically everything below LCS.
I really appreciate that about you. It's good to see that someone's like, you know what, I would only consider it under specific circumstances, but my goal is to really help out this. I think that's really admirable, and I appreciate that about you. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Kind of looking at, you mentioned the international stage. Obviously, G2 is doing very well. Do you think that they've kind of cracked a code in being able to like play in an international stage, or do you think that international stage this year wasn't as good? So
I think that I don't know if you could say there's like a code cracked, but I do think that there's always been this kind of idea that it's funny because if you go all the way back, the narrative was that season 2, not season 2, but season 3, starting with the SKT victory.
Yeah.
The narrative was that Korea will always be dominant, right?
Yeah.
After that victory, it's just no one can touch Korea. Then slowly over the years, we've seen like slight chips at the narrative where it was like, okay, the East is always going to be dominant. And then you've seen like more chips at the narrative where, okay, well, G2 was the exception. And if you're in Europe, you shouldn't expect to win Worlds and all of this other. But I do think it's just there is an evening of the playing field that's happening. And I've always kind of felt like if Faker didn't exist and SKT didn't exist, we would feel that there's a gap, right, between Korea and other regions, but we wouldn't feel that it's like as death-defying and insurmountable.
Okay.
Because there are definitely, like, you can see how teams like Rock's Tigers could lose games. You could see how teams like KT had vulnerabilities, but it felt like a lot of the times that SKT was just always on another level. And Korean teams had a variety of different ways to play the game, but the quote-unquote Korean style was equated with how SKT played. So that's why I think, I guess for me, it's just, I don't think that G2 has cracked some kind of code. It's just that all of those players have, and their understanding of the game and its fundamentals are really solid. Like when they watch the game, I wouldn't say that, they've played the greatest series of all time. Definitely had better decision making than SKT in that series, and that's something that it's like I've always kind of been championing that SKT's early game, not SKT's. Like SKT doesn't focus as much on the laning phase, right? So that's an area where we can match them, or where we can make plays around like early phase of the game, and then you see them losing a lot of those early games. So if we channel on that, and then in mid game slightly take them over, but you see G2 kind of outclassing them in other phases of the game. I've maintained that G2's strengths are more their mid-game macro than their early game, whereas like Fnatic I felt had a better early. So I don't think it's like a code that's been cracked. I think it's just like really, really hard players who didn't let people say you're not going to win because you're in Europe. And I think the fact that it's Europe in particular is important because it's the solo queue.
Yeah.
Right? Like the players coming from players who don't have access to Korean solo queue, which the Chinese teams that have done very well internationally before have. Their players have played on the Korean ladder. So that's why I think it's really interesting to me to see like solo queue base be something that the stranglehold on, like if you don't have access to Korean solo queue, you can't win an international event, or you can't do well internationally. Or you can't beat a Korean powerhouse, has been loosened by kind of G2 defeating SKT.
Awesome.
Regardless of how they perform in the final, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. This will be out after that, and we'll all know that. I mean, you can take a 50-50 shot who you think is going to win. You're just going to look like a god or you're not. I mean, let's throw that out there. So, believe it or not, I only have one question for you left. We've kind of come to that conclusion of all the topics that I could think of, and I've really enjoyed your time, and I really appreciate you getting here. And I'm sorry about the internet. I still appreciate you kind of huddling out here. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed your time. If you didn't, that's too bad, and I'm sorry you got stuck here anyways. That being said, my last question for you. If you could see anyone being on the show, the only criteria is that they need to be involved in kind of entertainment in general. So they can be a YouTuber, they can be a streamer, they can be in esports. They don't necessarily have to be front-facing. They can be coaches, analysts, behind the scenes, anything like that. They have to speak English because I'm uncultured and only speak English. Who would you like to see on the show?
This is actually, the thing is that I knew that you asked this question, right? And so I was thinking I had reason I completely forgot about it. I ended up not doing anything. I would say Razzle Plaza.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I think Raz is a really interesting guy.
Yeah.
And he would have a good time. He would get a kick out of you, I think.
Okay, I mean that's good.
That would be
I
one
hope
that would
I hope those are positive. So that being said, thank you so much, Kelsey, for being on the show. If you have any shout outs or anything like that, you're more than welcome to have them. People sometimes take them, people sometimes don't. It's up to you. Here's your floor.
So thanks to Desherto who let me in the off season. So that was very cool, and I liked working with them. They gave me a lot of freedom. And also thank you to 100 Thieves for employing me this past year. It's been a great time and a really fun off season. We'll say that. So that'll be it's going to be an interesting one. It'll be a banger.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. For everyone out there, this has been the Minds of Media. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day. And